Hi, everybody. Top of the morning to ya. It has been a long, not to mention cold week. So let's get right into it today. No need for any of the preliminaries. If you listen to a recent episode of mine, I believe number 59, I mentioned the name Marc Dutroux and how I should write that name down for future reference. Well, I actually remembered to do that for once. I Googled his name, and as luck would have it, there was a new article posted the morning I started researching and writing this story. I won't spoil that article yet since it pertains to a recent super douche move by the convict's lawyer, but we have that to look forward to. Alright, without further ado, I bring you the story of Marc Dutroux, the Belgian serial killer and builder of a house of horrors. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from Murderpedia, BelgianNewsAgency.eu, People.com, and the rest I will put down below. Our story today takes place in Belgium during the 1990s and features a bundle of blunders by law enforcement, and I will warn you, it is extremely frustrating in that sense. But unlike our amazing number one 40-hour workweek America, Belgium officials learn from their mistakes. Okie dokie, here we go. Today, Belgium, as far as I know, is a relatively happy country with low crime rates, immersive cultures, and delicious cuisine. However, back in the 1990s, Belgium painted a much different picture. According to the book, Corruption in Contemporary Politics, no, I didn't read the whole thing. Quote, the 1990s in Belgium will be remembered as the decade of political corruption, scandals, and crises. It led to a decline in Belgian citizens' trust in their political institutions, while the country's external image was tarnished. For instance, the political scandals that shook the country in the 90s were based on a series of episodes of corruption involving top politicians, the judiciary, and civil servants. In addition, other themes surfaced simultaneously: fraud concerning the bank industry, child disappearances, hint hint, blunders made by the police, and several food crises. End quote. In the summer of 1995, young girls began to disappear. 8-year-old Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune were kidnapped while playing outside their homes in Charleroi, Belgium. Right away, the police received 2 tips. One unofficial informant alleged that Marc Dutroux, a convicted sex offender, had been digging out a basement in his home, creating this dungeon of sorts to hide kidnapped girls. The second tip came straight from Dutroux's mother. Not long after the first 2 disappearances, Marc Dutroux's own mother reported him to the police, claiming that he was holding girls captive in one of his houses. No formal record of the first tip exists, but the investigators did follow up. However, not until months later. Whether the officers were presented with a warrant or simply asked nicely, they soon had permission to search his residence. During the presumably half-assed search, investigators found handcuffs, chloroform, and vaginal cream, none of which apparently raised any red flags. And before concluding the search, they heard the faint screams of young girls. Marc Dutroux was quick to say something about the next-door neighbor's children playing in the street, and without thinking twice, the police turned around and left his house. They took a convicted sex offender at his word and left. 2 months later, 2 more girls went missing: 19-year-old Anne Marshall and 17-year-old Effie Lambrix. They disappeared while hitchhiking near Austin in the Dutch-speaking area of Flanders. Their cases soon went, quote, cold, like the first 2 girls, Melissa and Julie. Even though he appeared innocent in the recent kidnappings, Marc Dutroux would still get himself into trouble, and in December of 1995, he was arrested for theft and spent a few months in county jail, or whatever their equivalent is. Funnily enough, no more kidnappings were reported during this time, no more at all until the following spring, soon after Marc Dutroux's release from jail. In May of 1996, 12-year-old Sabine Darden was taken while biking to her school. And only months later, yet another girl was taken. On August 9th, 1996, 14-year-old Letitia Delhez, or Delez, was abducted while walking home from a swimming pool in southeast Belgium. As frustrations grew and parents everywhere worried, police still had no answers. And yes, it was for lack of trying. According to Crime Library, there was finally a break in the case of the missing girls in August of '96. While conducting a neighborhood search near the area where police thought that one of the girls had been kidnapped, they came across a person who remembered a suspicious vehicle close to the individual's house. The eyewitness was able to recall some of the numbers on their license plate, which eventually led police back to Marc Dutroux. On August 15, 1996, police raided his house where they discovered a soundproof concrete dungeon in the basement. The dungeon was the one of which an eyewitness had told them about the previous year, that informant. Within this dungeon, they discovered two young girls who were alive but beaten terribly and had been sexually abused. The two girls were Letitia and Sabine. Both girls had admitted to being sexually assaulted and filmed pornographically by Marc. Police found further evidence, including at least 300 child porn videos. A few days later, after the discovery of Darden and Delhez, police exhumed the bodies of two more girls who were not as unfortunate to survive in Dutroux's deadly dungeon. Julie and Melissa, the two 8-year-old friends who disappeared together in June of '95, were found buried in Marc Dutroux's backyard at another one of his houses, in Sars-la-Bussière. End quote. All 6 kidnapped girls had finally been accounted for. Sadly, only 2 of them were found alive. But let's explore a bit more about Marc Dutroux's background and how the police may have been able to save all 6, if not for their incompetence. According to All That's Interesting, Marc Dutroux was born in Brussels on November 6, 1956. According to BBC, he was the eldest of 5 children. Marc would later claim that his parents and school teachers often beat him. They separated in 1971 and left Marc home alone, embarking on life as a drifter. As an adult, Dutroux moved from place to place, working as an electrician and allegedly as a sex worker. Gradually, he turned to a life of crime, dealing drugs, stealing, and trading stolen cars, even mugging people. Allegedly, he amassed enough money doing this that he eventually owned 7 houses. Dutroux was married by the time he was 20 and had 2 sons. His first wife would later claim that Marc would often beat her and had multiple extramarital affairs. The two would separate in the early 1980s, leaving Marc Dutroux free to pursue one of the women with whom he had an affair with, Michelle Martin. Martin would soon become his second wife and an accomplice in his crimes. In the summer of 1985, Marc Dutroux allegedly became frustrated with how tedious it was to pick up women, even though he had a wife, and decided to kidnap and rape them instead, with the help of his second wife, Michelle Martin. He told me kidnapping and raping them took less time than hitting on them, Martin would say, according to a Belgian publication. He said that would be my advantage too. That way, he would have more time to spend on me, and he did it all for me, so I had to help him with the kidnappings. End quote. Ridiculous, first of all, but the couple didn't operate alone. Jean van Petegem, or Jean van Petegem, a family friend, had been crashing at Marc's house after his relationship fell apart. Marc Dutroux would soon recruit this guy to help with his plans, convincing him that he, quote, owed Dutroux. Michelle Martin, meanwhile, would drive the van while the two men would abduct the girls. On June 7, 1985, they found their first victim, 11-year-old Sylvie D., who was walking home alone after swimming at a nearby pool. Seems to be a theme. As they drove past the young girl, the men jumped out of the car, grabbed her, pulled her into the van, and put tape over her mouth and eyes. The kidnappers then drove Sylvie to a garage in Rue, where Dutroux raped her, took a photo of her on a Polaroid camera before letting her go. The other kidnappings happened in much the same way. A young woman or girl would be out walking by herself when she noticed a van following her. Then, a pair of men would grab her, pull her into the van, telling her they just wanted some ransom money. Then they'd put tape over her eyes and drive her to a house, Marc Dutroux's house. There, the victim would be held captive and raped by the two men repeatedly before they finally drove her back to the neighborhood and released her. Sometimes, the men would give their victims treats like chocolates and apples, and often, Dutroux photographed or filmed them naked. In the end, the police caught up to these serial rapists. The accomplice Jean Van P. had given away too much information about himself when speaking to the victims, and based on interviews with the girls, police were able to pinpoint him as a suspect. He quickly confessed to everything, pinning most of the blame on Marc Dutroux. In 1986, Marc Dutroux and his wife, Michelle Martin, were arrested for the abduction and rape of 5 women and girls between the ages of 11 and 19. Police soon found damning evidence on both Dutroux and Jean Van P., including a pencil case they had stolen from one of the girls, and sexually explicit photos and videos of the victims. End quote. All because it's too hard to hit on women. Alright, everyone, please give a warm welcome to blunder number 1 by the justice system. After his arrest for these kidnappings and rapes, Dutroux's trial wouldn't come until the end of 1989. And once found guilty, he was sentenced to 13.5 years for his crimes, while his 2 accomplices both got roughly 5 to 6 years. While in prison, Marc Dutroux's mother spoke up for a second time. This time with a bone-chilling warning for officials. She wrote to them saying, quote, I have known for a long time, and with good cause, my eldest's temperament. What I do not know, and what all the people who know him fear, it's what he has in mind for the future. End quote. And for the love of God, these people should have listened to the man's mother. Nope. After serving a mere 3 years of his 13-year sentence, Marc Dutroux was released back into the public. This time with government financial assistance and a plan. He would not make the same mistake of letting his victims go. Marc Dutroux sought help from a psychologist and received sleeping pills, which he then planned to use as a sedative on girls. And in 1995, he was on the prowl again, starting with Melissa and Julie. He kept these 2 girls in his homemade dungeon for months, abusing them daily. When he was arrested and spent some time in jail for car theft, these poor girls starved to death, alone in a dark, damp cellar. Quote, Michelle Martin later confessed she was aware her husband was holding 8-year-olds in a secret dungeon, and that she was responsible for making sure they had food and water while he was in jail. But while she stopped by the house to feed the dogs, she claimed she was too frightened to feed the girls. End quote. Coward bitch. As for Anne Marshall and Lambrix, the other 2 girls that did not make it, they were discovered gagged and buried at another of Dutroux's properties. So just for reference, after his arrest, his trial wouldn't start until 2004 due to a whole slew of issues we are about to cover. According to All That's Interesting, the public was shocked to learn that despite multiple tips from informants and his mother, and searches of Marc's home, it took 14 months for police to piece together that Dutroux had been behind the kidnappings all along. Had the crimes been solved sooner, it was possible that the 4 victims who died could have survived. This case caused such outrage that on October 2nd, 1996, hundreds of thousands of people flooded the streets of Belgium to march in support of the victims and their families, and in protest against the way authorities had mismanaged the case. I read somewhere it was like either 250 or 350,000 people. Over time, theories began to surface that Marc Dutroux had been part of a larger pedophile ring involving people in high places, and that authorities had been protecting Dutroux to cover up their own involvement. In 1996, a woman named Regina Loof told investigators that she had been, quote, given by her parents to a family friend at the age of 12, and then brought to sex parties where powerful people tortured, raped, and sometimes murdered young girls. She alleged Marc Dutroux would bring drugs and eventually girls to these parties. Though elements of her story were corroborated, local news made her out to be a fantasist, a loony, and when Dutroux's case finally went to trial, she was not allowed to appear as a witness. Authorities claimed it took so long for a date to be set for his murder trial because of these conspiracy theories and how they led them on a wild goose chase looking for a mythical pedophile network. As if this case hadn't been disastrous enough, in April of 1998, Dutroux escaped from prison. And though he was quickly recaptured, the fallout of this fiasco was immediate. Belgium's police chief, justice minister, and interior minister all resigned. Then in July of 1999, Hubert Massa, the advocate general in the case, died by suicide. So finally, on March 2004, Marc Dutroux's case went to trial. This trial, according to basically everything I was reading, is one of the biggest in Belgium's history. It lasted over 3 months and involved hundreds and hundreds of witnesses. Marc Dutroux would admit to the kidnapping and rape charges, but he denied killing any girls. Quote, both survivors, Sabine and Letitia, gave searing testimonies. Sabine said Dutroux was the one who kidnapped her, that he was the only captor she saw during her 80 days in captivity, and that he was the only one who abused her. Letitia said that in the 4 days she spent in captivity, Marc Dutroux chained her to a bed and raped her repeatedly. He didn't give a damn. He would ask if it hurt while smiling, as if it made him laugh, she said. Dutroux, meanwhile, claimed to be part of this rumored pedophile ring, painting himself as a mere pawn in these crimes rather than the main perpetrator. Prosecutors would find no evidence to confirm that this pedophile ring existed, and Sabine also asked Marc why, if such an organization existed, why hadn't he given her to this supposed pedophile ring? Marc said it was because he was, quote, attached to her. I did not give her because I knew that she was going to be killed, he said. Baloney. On June 17, 2004, Marc Dutroux was convicted of rape, kidnapping, and leading a child kidnap gang. He was also found guilty of murdering Anne Marshall, Effie Lambrix, Bernard Weinstein, one of his old accomplices, and was sentenced to life in prison. Michelle Martin, his second wife, was found guilty of killing the 2 young girls she'd knowingly neglected to feed while her husband was in jail, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. 2 other alleged accomplices, Michel Lelouvre and Michel Nihol, were also tried and sentenced to 25 years and 5 years respectively. End quote. Since his conviction, Marc Dutroux has filed for conditional release multiple times, but to this date he is still incarcerated in prison. In the wake of his case, the whole system got a major revamp. Quote, a parliamentary committee investigating the handling of the Dutroux case said that the young girls who were murdered may have been alive today if the police had not made so many mistakes during the investigation. The committee further recommended that Brussels prosecutor Benoit D be dismissed because he failed to do his job properly. Other officials were even found responsible in the deaths of the girls. Investigators were charged with ignoring warnings by informants during a crucial stage of the investigation, mistreating the parents of the victims, and failing to pass on vital information between prosecutors and police. Moreover, the report called for, quote, an overhaul of Belgium's police, replacing the three current services: the local police, the judicial police, and the national, I should have looked up how to pronounce this, Gendarmerie, I don't know, I'm sorry. Gendarmerie. See how they learn from their mistakes, America, and don't knowingly keep idiots running the show? That, my friends, is the story of Belgian serial killer and builder of dungeons, Marc Dutroux. But the story may not quite end there. Like I said at the beginning, a recent article published caught my attention. Let me paraphrase that for you. And this comes from belgiannewsagency.eu. Quote, Marc Dutroux's lawyer will make a new attempt to secure his client's release. Dutroux was sentenced to life in prison in 2004 for kidnapping, hostage-taking, rape, murder, and trafficking. The reason for the new release attempt is the case of Freddie Orion, Freddie Orion, who murdered car dealer Roland and his family in 1979. The European Court of Human Rights ruled in December that Belgium was treating the six-time murderer, quote, inhumanely. Orion now has 6 months to move to an institution where he can work on his return to society. What the fuck? Marc Dutroux's lawyer, Bruno Diaz, claims that the same should be possible for his client. There are clear similarities between the two cases, he said, referring to the conditions in which his client is being held. Marc Dutroux's letters are being read, and he can only speak to a few people. Quote, this man is being censored and muzzled. This is against human rights. End quote. I disagree. I think he should be able to censor and muzzle any rapist of young girls. Which is insane. This lawyer I don't understand his mental state. I mean, he's trying to how can you back this guy after killing and murdering young girls in his basement dungeon? And then you're like, well, he deserves to be treated better. Get fucked, Bruno. One notable difference is that Orion, unlike Dutroux, is no longer considered by psychiatric experts to be a danger to society. Bruno Diaz wants to find a psychiatrist, quote, who dares to go against the conclusion of the parole board's experts. I am aware that I will probably have to look abroad, end quote. If Bruno gets a favorable report, he wants to start a rehabilitation plan. After that, I would like to apply for an ankle tag for my client. It is still uncertain where we will have to serve the sentence, but it must be where he is protected from the people's vengeance. I just get angrier and angrier as I read this. You want to put this man back on the street. So frustrating. Just please keep an eye out for any more news on this ding-dong and his nutsack lawyer. We must keep him in prison. There's no way. Why would anybody, even this lawyer, want him back out on the streets? What the crap? As always, thank you all so much for taking the time to listen in today. I truly, truly appreciate it. Stick around for what I think could be some quite possibly groundbreaking news. Be back in a minute. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Buongiorno. Before we get back into the spoopy whoopy, real quick, have y'all heard about the Volvo Overseas Delivery Program? I was on Facebook Marketplace, and then I got sucked into some videos on Facebook, and whatnot. Anyway, I came across this post about a Volvo program that I was certain would be just clickbait or fake. Lo and behold, it's better than I could have imagined. According to the Volvo site, if you purchase a vehicle through this program, they will fly you out to explore Europe in your new Volvo free of charge. They treat you like royalty. First-class airfare, a car waiting to pick you up at the airport in Sweden, an elegant lunch as you arrive, and your choice of stay at multiple beautiful hotels. I googled the Nissan Altima Overseas Delivery Program, and the screen literally had diddly squat on it. I just thought that was the coolest thing a car company has ever done. Okay, if what some people are claiming is true, this could be the biggest twist in a true crime case we have ever seen. Hopping right into it, this is written by Casey Baker of People News, titled, "The LA Innocence Project Believes Scott Peterson May Be Innocent." Quote, on the day before Christmas 2002, Lacey Peterson, who was 8 months pregnant with her first child, vanished, unleashing what would become one of the most high-profile and closely watched murder cases in the nation's history. 4 months after she disappeared, the badly decomposed bodies of Lacey, who was 27, and her unborn son, Connor, were found in the San Francisco Bay. The prime suspect? Her husband, Scott Peterson, who said he was fishing when his pregnant wife vanished. Convicted in 2004 of 2 counts of first-degree murder, Scott was sentenced to death row in 2005, and that sentence was overturned in 2020. Lacey's family has been unwavering in their belief that he killed Lacey and Connor. From the start, Scott, who is now 51, has maintained his innocence. Now, with the help of the LA Innocence Project, he is trying for a chance at freedom. Here's what we know about the case. On Wednesday, August 9, 1997, after meeting at a California Polytechnic State University, Lacey and Scott Peterson were living in Modesto, California. In May 2002, when she found out she was pregnant, the excited mom-to-be began decorating their nursery for the son she and Scott were expecting, who they named Connor. Life for Lacey seemed blissful until shortly before Christmas. On the night of December 23, 2002, Lacey talked to her mother, Sharon, on the phone. It was the last time her mother would ever talk to her daughter. Shortly after 10:15 a.m. on December 24th, a neighbor found the couple's dog, Mackenzie, roaming the neighborhood alone and brought it back to their yard. There was no sign of Lacey or Scott, who was allegedly fishing in the San Francisco Bay, about 90 miles away from Modesto. Worried about Lacey, her parents called 911 at 6 p.m. on December 24th that night to report her missing. Police launched a massive search for her in the Modesto area, saying that they suspected foul play. A month later, on January 24th, 2003, Amber Frey came forward at a police press conference saying that she had started seeing Scott, who told her he was a widower, about a month before Lacey vanished. When she saw news reports about Lacey's disappearance, she contacted the authorities. 4 months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple discovered the body of a late-term male fetus in the San Francisco Bay. A day later, the body of a recently pregnant woman washed onto the shore 1 mile away from where the baby was found. DNA tests verified that they were the bodies of Lacey and Connor. Authorities were unable to determine a cause of death because the bodies were badly decomposed, and Lacey's body was missing the head and both forearms. On April 18, 2003, police arrested Scott, who had recently dyed his brown hair blonde, and charged him with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances. He pleaded not guilty. Investigators were very suspicious of the items Scott had with him when they made their arrest, which included survival gear, camping equipment, $15,000 in cash, 2 driver's licenses, and 4 cell phones, which they viewed as an indication he was planning to flee to Mexico. Laci Peterson's family sought the death penalty for Scott. The DA did too. During the trial, jurors heard testimonies from Amber Frey and Laci's mother. Prosecutors also showed the jury 2 photos in which Scott Peterson was smiling widely while his wife was missing. The prosecution contended that his motive was to collect a $250,000 insurance policy on his wife. On November 12, 2004, he was convicted of first-degree murder in Laci's death and second-degree murder in Connor's death. In subsequent interviews, jurors said Peterson's lack of emotion and his behavior towards Amber Frey indicated that he was guilty. The judge sentenced Peterson to death, calling Laci and Connor's murder cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Over the years, Scott has fought to clear his name, winning 2 major legal victories in 2020. In August, he was given the chance to face a new penalty phase trial after his death penalty sentence was overturned by the California Supreme Court, who cited jury selection errors. Then, in October of that year, the Supreme Court ruled that a lower court should take a second look at his case to determine whether his guilty verdict should be overturned. In court in 2021, Scott's death sentence was officially vacated, resentencing him to life in prison. The following year, a San Mateo County Superior Court judge denied Peterson's bid for a new trial. Now, it gets interesting. In 2021, Scott's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, said on the Today Show that she believes there is evidence showing that Laci was killed after Christmas Eve 2002. Quote, "There's evidence that was completely ignored that shows Laci was alive after Scott left for the day. But also, there was no evidence he had anything to do with what happened to Laci." End quote. She said she felt that Scott's months-long affair with Amber Frey helped seal his fate. Being a cheater, she said on the show, does not mean that your brother is a killer. "I don't think you can take that leap," she said. I can. Now, the LA Innocence Project has taken on the case. The organization is seeking new evidence in Scott's original trial, saying that Peterson's state and federal constitutional rights were violated. Filings entered on Wednesday and first obtained by the outlet say that, quote, "New evidence now supports Mr. Peterson's long-standing claim of innocence and raises many questions into who abducted and killed Laci and Connor Peterson." Attorneys for the LA Innocence Project cite updated witness statements that point to multiple areas of interest, including a December 2002 burglary of a Modesto home across the street from the Petersons' house. Scott's attorneys have previously argued his wife was killed after she witnessed the men breaking into the neighbor's house during a dog walk while Scott was on a solo fishing trip Christmas Eve morning. End quote. Like I said, this could be massive. Maybe I shouldn't put this out there right now, but I do believe in his guilt for a few reasons. Namely, the dyeing his hair, $15,000 cash, 4 cell phones, and 2 driver's licenses. But crazier things have happened, and it will be incredibly interesting to see how this plays out. They would have to remake so many documentaries. Netflix would have a field day. Alrighty, y'all. I believe this is where I leave you. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everyone. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.